She had always been the invisible one, overlooked and underestimated, her presence dismissed with a glance or a whispered judgment. In the world of wealth and privilege, she was just a shadow, a black girl too often treated like she didn't belong. But in that moment, as a white woman demanded she leave the store, something inside her snapped. The confrontation would expose not just the cruel prejudice she faced every day, but a shocking truth about the man she called father, one that would unravel everything she thought she knew about herself. The soft jingle of a store door echoed through the quiet street, a sound so mundane, yet it would be the prelude to an event that would shake the balance of power. It was the kind of sound that never drew a second thought, but today, it hung in the air like an omen. The store was nestled between two towering buildings, hidden from the bustle of the main road. Its windows were polished to a shine, reflecting the bright sunlight that bounced off the pavement. Inside, the aisles were neat, each product precisely placed, inviting customers to wander through the well-organized shelves. But for those who truly paid attention, the store had an unsettling, sterile quality to it, almost like a facade designed to hide something deeper, more personal. A young woman entered the store, her presence as unassuming as the sound of the door's chime. Maya, a black girl in her early 20s, moved through the aisles with practiced ease, her eyes scanning the shelves for a simple purchase. Her clothes were modest but stylish, the kind that balanced between youthful and professional. She was an ordinary customer, yet the world around her had a way of casting her into an uncomfortable spotlight. As she reached for a bottle of perfume on the shelf, she felt it. The coldness. It was a sensation that couldn't be ignored, like the heavy gaze of someone who had been watching for far too long. She didn't need to turn around to know that the store clerk, a woman in her mid-30s, with platinum blonde hair and sharp, scrutinizing eyes, was staring at her. It wasn't the usual customer service look. It was a glare, a judgment that pierced through Maya's skin. Maya could feel her heart rate pick up slightly. She'd been in enough stores to know that feeling well. The one where you're seen, not as a person, but as something to be tolerated, something out of place. The store clerk adjusted the glasses perched on her nose and straightened, her lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. Maya's instincts screamed at her to just grab the perfume and leave. But there was something about the clerk's stare that was too intense, too invasive. Her presence in the store was being questioned. She could feel it in the air. And it wasn't a subtle feeling. No, it was overt, an accusation hanging in the air between them. Just as Maya reached for her wallet, a sharp voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me." The clerk's tone was cutting, deliberate. "Can I help you with something?" Maya froze. There was no warmth in the voice, no desire to assist, only the cold undercurrent of suspicion. She hesitated for a moment, looking up at the clerk, who stood rigid, waiting for a response. "I'm just browsing," Maya said, keeping her tone neutral. She forced a smile, though it felt strained. She'd done nothing wrong, but something in the clerk's stance made her feel as though she had been caught in the act of a crime she didn't commit. The clerk didn't reply immediately, her gaze lingering on Maya as though she were trying to unearth some hidden truth, some lie lurking just beneath the surface. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice flat, but with a sharp edge. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." The words hit Maya like a slap. "What?" she asked, though she had already begun to suspect what was happening. "You heard me," the clerk said, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "I don't think you're here to shop, so I'll have to ask you to leave." Maya's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not in this day and age. She opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She glanced around, as if expecting to see someone step in and stop this ridiculous situation from escalating. But there was no one. The other customers, if there were any, had already disappeared into the aisles, too far to hear. It was just her and the clerk. "Look, I don't know what you're," Maya started, her voice trembling slightly with the shock of all. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The clerk cut her off, her tone growing colder, more forceful. "You're not welcome here." The words stung, cutting through Maya's composure. It was a direct attack, not just on her as a customer, but on her very existence. The clerk was dismissing her based on a presumption, one she knew was rooted in something darker than mere misunderstanding. This wasn't about the perfume. This was about Maya's presence in the store. Maya's breath quickened as the clerk stepped closer, looming over her with an almost predatory air. She was a woman used to having control, to imposing her will on others without question. Maya had been on the receiving end of this type of treatment before, but never quite like this, not with so little shame, so little attempt to disguise it. Before Maya could respond, the door chimed again. This time, it wasn't just the air changing, it was the atmosphere itself. The weight in the room shifted, a strange presence entering the store. Maya turned to glance at the door, her heart skipping a beat as a tall, well-dressed man walked in, his presence commanding. Mr. Caldwell, the CEO of one of the largest tech firms in the city. Maya's father. His appearance immediately changed the dynamics. The clerk's demeanor faltered, her smirk turning to something resembling nervousness. She straightened up, suddenly unsure, like a predator confronted by something far larger than herself. Mr. Caldwell didn't acknowledge the clerk at first. His sharp eyes were already scanning the store, looking for his daughter, his gaze immediately locking onto Maya. His presence alone made the clerk stumble back, her confident stance vanishing in an instant. Maya's breath hitched, not out of relief, but out of the rush of emotions she wasn't prepared to face. The clerk opened her mouth to speak, but Mr. Caldwell was faster. "Is there a problem?" His voice was smooth, but there was a sharpness to it that immediately put the clerk on edge. "Mr. Caldwell, The clerk's voice wavered. She knew the man, knew who he was. His reputation preceded him, and she had never expected him to step into the store. Not now, not like this. But there was no turning back. She could feel the tension building in her chest as Maya stood frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. Maya glanced at her father, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her want to shrink. She could see the slight furrow in his brow, a reflection of his usual calm exterior cracking under the weight of what was unfolding. But there was something else there too, something Maya couldn't quite place, something dangerous. The clerk finally swallowed hard and stammered, I was just asking her to leave. She wasn't supposed to be here." Maya's father stared at the clerk for a long moment, his gaze calculating, before he turned to Maya, his eyes softening ever so slightly. "Maya, are you okay?" The question was simple, but it carried more weight than anything the clerk had said. Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, Dad, I'm fine." Mr. Caldwell turned back to the clerk, his tone now cold and unyielding. "You're lucky my daughter is so forgiving. This isn't how we do things. Not in my store. Not in any store." The clerk, now visibly sweating, nodded quickly, fumbling with the words. "I didn't know, sir. I didn't realize." "Don't make excuses," he interrupted, his voice like steel. "You've embarrassed yourself. And you've embarrassed this establishment." He didn't wait for her to respond. Instead, he took Maya's arm gently but firmly, guiding her toward the door. "Let's go," he said, his voice quiet but full of authority. As the door closed behind them, the clerk's disbelieving eyes followed, her own heart pounding. She had expected trouble, but not this kind of fallout. She could feel it now. The weight of her mistake, the sting of having crossed a line that would never be erased. Maya stood in silence, the cool afternoon air swirling around her as she followed her father to their sleek, black car parked just outside the store. Her heart had not yet caught up to the events unfolding. She could still feel the sting of the clerk's words, the icy dismissal, as if she were something disposable, just a momentary inconvenience. As they drove away, the weight of what had just happened settled on her. The city she had grown up in, a place that always seemed to promise opportunity, had its own undercurrents, currents that, as a young black woman, she was only just beginning to understand in full. She had always felt different, but the encounter at the store had made her feel something deeper. Not just different, less. Less than the people who came and went, the ones who had the privilege of being seen as customers, not outliers. But her father, Damien Caldwell, had always made her feel invincible. To him, she was the most important person in the world. He had built his empire, his tech company, from the ground up, against all odds. He was a man who commanded the room, whose name carried weight and authority in every conversation. And he had done it all for one reason: to give her a life where she would never have to fight for respect for equality. A life where the world bent to her will. But today, something in her father's eyes had unsettled her. It wasn't just the interaction with the clerk. It was something deeper, something unspoken between them. Maya had always known that her father was fiercely protective of her. But today, there had been a look on his face that she had never seen before. It was a subtle shift in his demeanor, but it was enough to make her feel like an outsider in her own home. Damien Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Technologies, was a man forged from the fires of adversity. A man whose journey had begun in the underprivileged neighborhoods of the city, where opportunities were scarce and doors were often slammed in his face. He had risen to prominence in the tech world, creating innovative products that had changed the landscape of the industry. He had never forgotten where he came from, nor had he allowed the wealth and power he'd accumulated to corrupt him. But as much as Damien had built his empire, he had also built walls around himself, walls that no one could penetrate. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. His charm was undeniable, his intelligence razor-sharp. But beneath the surface, there was a man who had always feared that his success might come at a cost that, over the years, had grown more and more apparent. The cost of losing touch with the very things that had made him fight for success in the first place: family, love, and the sense of belonging. For years, Damien had kept a tight grip on his life, his business, and his daughter. He had ensured that she was never exposed to the harsh realities of the world, that she could live a life free from the prejudices he had faced. He'd shielded her from the cruelties of the world, hoping that she would be able to enjoy a life of privilege, far removed from the struggles that had defined his own. But today, watching Maya walk away from the store, he felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt. He had worked tirelessly to protect her, to build a world where she would never know the pain of rejection. And yet, in doing so, he had kept her at arm's length from the very world that he had once fought so hard to be a part of. He had kept her sheltered, protected, but had he prepared her for the complexities of life outside the bubble he had created? The look in the store clerk's eyes, one of suspicion and disdain, had shaken him, and for the first time in a long while, he questioned the cost of his success. Was it truly worth it if it meant his daughter would never understand the struggle that had shaped him into the man he was today? Maya had always known that her father had built a fortress around their lives, a fortress that, for better or for worse, had kept her safe. But as she grew older, she had begun to feel the weight of that protection, the stifling sense of isolation. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was a person, a young woman with her own goals, her own desires. And she had begun to crave something more than the polished world her father had created for her. Her goal was simple. She wanted to break free from the bubble of privilege that her father had created for her. She wanted to experience the world on her own terms, to make her own decisions, and to prove that she could navigate the complexities of life without the shield of her father's name. But the world she longed to embrace was not the world her father had prepared her for. It was a world full of challenges that she had never encountered before, challenges that made her question whether she had the strength to stand on her own. Today's incident at the store had brought those challenges to the forefront. It wasn't just about the clerk's rejection. It was about the realization that the world saw her differently. No matter how much money her father had, no matter how successful he had become, she would never be seen as anything other than the color of her skin. And that was something that no amount of wealth could shield her from. Maya's internal conflict was clear. She wanted to be seen for who she truly was, not just as the daughter of a powerful CEO, but as an individual with her own aspirations, her own identity. She wanted to fight for respect, to prove that she deserved more than the assumptions people made about her. But she was torn. How could she fight for herself when her very existence was tied to a man who had built his empire by playing the game of the world's prejudices? How could she step outside of his shadow when his success was both her greatest asset and her greatest burden? The tension between Maya and Damien had always been there, buried beneath the surface. Damien had always tried to protect her, to give her everything she could ever want. But in doing so, he had also created a distance that had slowly grown over the years. Maya had never known what it was like to struggle the way her father had. She had never known the pain of being denied opportunities, the sting of racism and prejudice that her father had fought against every day. She had grown up in a world of luxury, where doors were open for her, where she was treated with respect, simply because of the name she carried. But Maya was tired of that world. She was tired of being seen as a product of her father's success rather than an individual in her own right. She wanted to stand on her own 2 feet, to be judged for her own actions and accomplishments, not for the wealth and privilege that had come with her father's name. Damien, on the other hand, had never fully understood her desire to break free. To him, protecting her from the world's harsh realities was the greatest gift he could give her. He had fought tooth and nail to build the life they had, and he didn't want her to face the hardships that had shaped him. He wanted her to have everything he had never had, to live without fear, without the burden of discrimination. But deep down, Damien knew that his protection was both a blessing and a curse. He had shielded her from a world, but in doing so, he had also shielded her from the very things that would help her understand who she truly was. And that realization, that nagging feeling in his gut, was something he could no longer ignore. Maya stood at the window of the grand, modern office overlooking the city. The skyline, bathed in the warm orange glow of the setting sun, reflected the prosperity Damien had worked so hard to achieve. Yet, despite the beauty of the view, her thoughts were far from the gleaming towers and the life she had been born into. Her mind was tangled with the events of the day, the subtle humiliation at the store, the sting of a world that refused to see her for who she was beyond the color of her skin. She knew she was being dramatic. It was just a store, right? A clerk with a bad attitude. But something had shifted inside her. The weight of it hadn't left her. It gnawed at her. A small spark of something that, if left unchecked, would begin to burn through the walls her father had so carefully built around her. Everything okay? Damien's voice broke through her reverie. She turned, her father's familiar silhouette framed by the doorway. He looked every bit the powerful CEO, his sharp suit contrasting with the sleek glass walls of the office. But there was something in his expression, something unreadable that made her pause. Maya tried to brush it off. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Damien walked over to her, standing by her side, his eyes scanning the horizon. "About today?" She hesitated. "Not just today. Everything. This a life." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting from the city to her face. "I've given you everything you could ever need, Maya. You know that, right?" "I know," she replied softly, but the words felt empty, hollow. The ache inside her grew. Before he could respond, Maya's phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her attention away from her father. She picked it up quickly, the bright screen flashing with a notification from her assistant. "Dad, it's work. I'll be right back." Damien nodded, his lips tight. "Don't stay up too late, okay? There's no rush." She didn't answer, already lost in the chaos of her phone. But as she scrolled through her messages, one notification caught her eye. It was a news alert, a headline that made her stomach tighten. CEO's daughter accused of racism in high-profile incident. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the short blurb. It was about the altercation earlier that day at the store, the incident Maya had thought was nothing but a fleeting moment. But now it was a headline, twisted and distorted, thrust into the public eye. The store clerk, who had made the comment, had gone viral on social media, sharing her version of events. What was supposed to be a routine shopping experience for Maya was now painted as a racially charged altercation between a privileged black woman and a working-class white store employee. Maya's heart raced as her mind spun, trying to make sense of it. How had it gone so wrong? The clerk had been rude. There was no denying that. But this was something else entirely. "Dad," she said, voice tight with panic, "you need to see this." Damien, sensing the shift in her tone, crossed the room quickly. His eyes scanned the screen, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long silence, he closed his eyes and exhaled sharply. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice cold and controlled as always. "This will blow over." But Maya could tell he wasn't as sure as he sounded. The tension in his shoulders, the brief flash of concern in his eyes, it was enough to make her question everything. "Dad," Maya said, her voice shaking now, "this isn't just going to blow over. This is serious. People are already taking sides. People I don't even know are commenting on it." She stopped herself, afraid to continue. Damien's jaw tightened, and for the first time that evening, Maya saw a flicker of something she rarely saw in him: uncertainty. "Maya, don't worry. We'll make sure it doesn't spiral. I'll get the PR team on it immediately. You don't need to be involved." Maya stood there, frozen, her chest tightening with the familiar sting of helplessness. She was a woman of power in her own right, yet when it came to her father's world, his carefully constructed empire, she was still a pawn, shielded and protected, but never truly in control. "This isn't just about me, Dad," she whispered, her voice faltering. "It's about how the world sees me, how the world sees us." Damien opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, his phone rang. He glanced at it, then back at Maya. "I'll deal with this," he said, his tone now sharp and final. "Don't let this get to you. Go home. Get some rest. We'll handle it tomorrow." Maya stood still as he left the room, her mind reeling. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to push the swirling thoughts away. But the more she tried to block them out, the more they consumed her. She was used to being in the public eye. Her father's status had thrust her into the limelight from an early age, but this was something entirely different. Her name was now associated with a scandal, a controversy she had never anticipated. It wasn't just her reputation at risk, it was her very identity. The labels being slapped on her, the assumptions that others would make, it all made her feel more like a pawn than ever before. As the night wore on, her phone continued to buzz with messages, notifications from people she barely knew, all commenting on the incident. Some supportive, others harshly critical, many just throwing fuel onto the fire. The weight of it pressed on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. And then, at 3 a.m., a call came through. It was her father. Maya picked up the phone, her hand trembling. "Dad." "Maya, we need to talk. Get in the car. We're heading to the office." When they arrived at Caldwell Technologies, Maya was met by her father's team of PR specialists, legal advisors, and a slew of security personnel. It was chaos, a storm that Damien was trying to weather with the same calm composure he always maintained, but Maya could see the cracks forming in his facade. "Listen to me," Damien said, pulling her aside. "This is bigger than just us now. You're going to have to face the media. We'll issue a public apology. It will be fine." "No," Maya shook her head, her voice firm. "You don't get it. It's not about an apology. It's about what happens next. What happens when this moment passes? What happens when we can't just hide behind your name anymore?" Damien's expression faltered for a split second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Maya, we'll get through this. I promise you." But Maya knew deep down that this wasn't just another scandal. This was something much deeper, something that threatened everything she had been taught to believe. It was a challenge to her identity, her place in the world, and the very foundation her father had spent years building. As the day unfolded, with phone calls, interviews, and statements being issued, Maya realized one undeniable truth: nothing would ever be the same again. This wasn't just about an argument at a store. This was the beginning of a battle that would force her to confront not only the world around her, but the very core of who she was and what she stood for. Maya's world had been a storm of meetings, statements, and increasingly hostile media scrutiny for the past week. What she thought would blow over had become a full-blown crisis, one that threatened not only her reputation but the very structure of her life. Each day felt like a battle, each conversation an attempt to defend herself against forces that were completely beyond her control. In the days that followed the store incident, she had been shielded by her father's ironclad empire, but that protection was wearing thin. The public's attention was relentless. The news cycle churned endlessly with new angles on the story, dragging up years of social media posts, old photos, and even interviews from her past. It felt like they were trying to rewrite her entire history, as if nothing she had done before mattered anymore. Today was no different. The media had found a new angle, one that pained Maya even more than the others: her father's complicity in perpetuating a system of privilege that allowed such incidents to occur. The weight of those words hung heavy in the air as Maya sat in the sleek glass conference room, her back to the city she had grown up in, her eyes trained on the digital screens displaying the latest headlines. The PR team had gathered her for yet another damage control session. Damien sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he flipped through a series of reports. Maya's assistant, Tanya, sat beside her, eyes focused on the screen in front of her as she typed furiously, probably drafting another statement that Maya would never be able to approve. "Maya, we need to act fast," Damien said, his voice cold but professional. "They're painting you as the villain now. This can't go on much longer. We need to change the narrative. It's time for you to make a public statement." Maya's hands clenched under the table, the sharpness of his words cutting through her. It wasn't the first time he had suggested this, but each time, something in her recoiled. How could she speak out, apologize, or try to placate the masses when all she could feel was the raw injustice of it all? "I'm not going to just apologize for something I didn't do," Maya replied, her voice tight. "I didn't do anything wrong, Dad." "You don't understand." Damien's tone shifted slightly more urgent now. "The world doesn't care about what you think is right. They care about perception. The media has already decided, Maya. The longer you remain silent, the worse this gets. You need to take control of the narrative." A pang of frustration shot through her. The media, the world, they didn't care about the truth. They wanted a spectacle, a scapegoat, and they had chosen her. But Damien's words lingered in her mind. It wasn't about being right anymore. It was about survival. Her father was always 2 steps ahead, but he had never taught her how to fight this battle on her own. She was just a pawn in his game, and that realization stung more than she was willing to admit. Before Maya could respond, Tanya spoke up, her voice carefully measured but laced with a hint of concern. "There's something else, Maya," she said, glancing at the screen. "This just came in. There's a new lawsuit." Maya's stomach dropped. She looked at the screen, where the headline was flashing in bold red letters: "CEO's daughter faces lawsuit for racially discriminatory behavior in retail incident." A law firm in the city had filed a formal complaint, claiming that Maya's actions were part of a broader pattern of behavior. Her mind spun. A lawsuit? How had it escalated to this point? "Maya, this is serious," Tanya continued, her tone soft but firm. "They're pushing for damages. They're alleging that this is a clear case of racial harassment, and the optics are not good." Damien's eyes darkened as he absorbed the news, his jaw tightening. "We need to settle this fast. Get the legal team on it." Maya stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. "I can't believe this is happening," she muttered, her voice breaking. "This is not who I am. I'm not a racist. I've spent my whole life." "I know, Maya," Damien interrupted, his voice softer now, but there was an edge to it. "But this is bigger than you. This is about our family, our company, and the empire I've built. We have to control the damage, or everything we've worked for will crumble." Her father's words hung in the air like a cold wind. Maya felt a sting of betrayal, a reminder of just how alone she was in this fight. Her father, the man who had taught her how to navigate the world of power, of wealth, was telling her to bow down, to admit fault and beg for forgiveness. Maya's eyes shifted to the window. The the skyline now a blur of lights, as though the city itself had become a prison. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She had to say something, do something. But what? The following day, Maya found herself in a small, exclusive cafe, tucked away from the public eye. She had chosen this spot for its privacy, but also for the feeling it gave her, the idea that she could escape, if only for a moment. She'd been working tirelessly with the legal team and the PR experts, trying to come up with a statement that would appease the media while somehow preserving her dignity. Her phone buzzed again. A message from a number she didn't recognize. "Maya, we need to talk. Meet me at the usual spot. It's important." It was from Ava. Maya's chest tightened. Ava was an old friend from her college days, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Ava had always been the type to speak her mind, no matter the cost. But they'd lost touch after Maya's life had spiraled into the world of high society. Ava had always known her for the person Maya used to be, the woman who cared more about people than status, the one who believed in standing up for what was right. Maya didn't think twice. She texted back, agreeing to meet her. She needed someone who would speak plainly, someone who didn't have a stake in her father's empire. When Maya arrived at the park where she and Ava used to meet, she saw her old friend standing by a fountain, her arms crossed, her expression serious. Ava had changed. She looked older, harder. The carefree spirit Maya remembered had faded, replaced by someone more guarded. "Ava," Maya said, stepping forward. "It's been a long time." Ava nodded but didn't smile. "Yeah, too long. You've been busy, huh?" Maya shifted uncomfortably, but Ava's gaze remained unwavering. "I saw the news, Maya," Ava said bluntly. "And I saw your father's statement. You're being painted as the villain, and that's not right. You've got to fight this." Maya blinked, taken aback. "I'm trying, but you don't understand. My father." "Don't make excuses for him," Ava interrupted, her voice sharp. "This isn't about your dad. This is about you. You've got to own this, Maya. Don't let them control your story." Maya stared at her, unsure how to respond. Ava's words were harsh, but there was something undeniable in her tone, a truth that Maya didn't want to confront. Later that night, Maya sat at her desk, the glow of the computer screen illuminating her face as she typed out a statement. But it was harder than it had ever been. For the first time, she felt like the walls were closing in on her, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. There were obstacles everywhere: public opinion, the media, the lawsuit. But worst of all, the obstacle that had become most apparent was the conflict within herself. Who was she really? And what was she willing to sacrifice to protect the image her father had built? The weight of the past few days had settled deep in Maya's bones, but was nothing compared to what was about to unfold. Each hour seemed to stretch endlessly, as though the clock itself was caught in a web of tension. She'd learned a long time ago how to mask her exhaustion, how to hide the strain behind a polished smile and confident words. But no one had prepared her for the isolation she felt now. No one had warned her that the very empire she had been raised to inherit would feel like a cage. It had all begun with that one moment in the store, the confrontation, the video that had gone viral. And yet, despite all the noise, despite the weight of the judgment from the world, she had never felt more adrift. Maya stood in the window of her father's high-rise office, the city stretching out beneath her like a landscape she no longer recognized. The lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt cold, nothing like the warmth she once felt when looking out from this very spot. The city felt like a stranger now, an indifferent entity, its promises hollow. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Ava, the only person who seemed to be offering any semblance of clarity in this storm. "You ready to meet?" Maya hesitated. What had started as a reunion between old friends had evolved into something more, a call for action, a plea for Maya to stand up for herself, for the woman she used to be. But Ava had no idea how deep the web went, how tangled the threads were. Maya glanced at the time. She had a meeting scheduled with her father's top lawyer in less than an hour, yet another session of trying to clean up the mess. Another reminder of how little control she had over her own life. But there was something in Ava's message, something raw, that called to her. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pressed her hand to the glass, the coldness seeping into her skin, anchoring her. It was almost as if the city was urging her to stay in place, to not move forward, to not make waves. But she wasn't one to back down, no matter the cost. She wasn't ready to let everything her father had built define her. She was more than just his daughter. The restaurant was dimly lit, its decor reminiscent of the old-world charm that Ava used to love. Maya stepped inside, feeling the tension in the air even before she saw Ava's familiar figure sitting in the corner booth. Ava's eyes met hers as she approached, and for a brief moment, Maya was flooded with a sense of familiarity. The years between them seemed to vanish as they slid into the booth across from one another, the world outside growing quieter. "You look different," Ava said after a long pause, her gaze piercing as she studied Maya. "Do I?" Maya replied, a weak smile playing at the edges of her lips. She wasn't sure if Ava's words were meant to be kind or judgmental, but it didn't matter. "Yeah, you do," Ava said softly. "You're not the same woman I knew. You're—" Ava hesitated, her voice lowering. "You're scared." Maya's breath hitched. She hadn't expected that. "I'm not scared," Maya said quickly, but the words didn't ring true. She was scared, deeply so. But fear, she had learned, was a luxury, a distraction, and Maya had long ago decided that she didn't have the right to indulge in it. Ava watched her, unblinking. "Maya, the world's falling apart around you, and you're just pretending it's not happening. You can't keep running from it." Maya's jaw tightened. "I'm not running," she replied, the words feeling like a plea more than a statement. Ava leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You are. You've been running from this your whole life, from who you really are, from the fact that everything your father has given you comes at a price." The words hit Maya like a slap. "I don't need a lecture, Ava," she said sharply, the frustration creeping into her voice. "I'm trying to hold it together, okay? I'm trying to fix this mess, but it's not just about me. There are people counting on me. People who only care about the image you present," Ava interrupted. "Your dad, he's not your ally in this. You know that, don't you?" Maya froze. The mention of her father always hit her harder than she wanted to admit. She didn't want to think about the way he'd thrown her into this mess, not once questioning the consequences of his actions. Maya had always been the family's crown jewel, meant to stand on a pedestal, perfect and pristine, ready to be presented to the world. But nothing in her had ever truly felt like it belonged there. Ava's words lingered in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. "You've got a choice, Maya," Ava said, her voice softer now. "You can keep being the puppet in your father's game, or you can fight for something real. But you can't do both. Not anymore." Maya clenched her fists beneath the table. She wanted to scream, to push Ava away and pretend none of this mattered. But deep inside, she knew Ava was right. The world, the media, the lawsuit. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of everything Maya had tried to ignore for years. "Tell me what I should do," Maya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ava's eyes softened for the briefest moment, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back, taking a long sip of her wine, allowing the silence to stretch. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters," Ava said finally. "The question is, are you ready for that?" Hours later, Maya stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, her hands trembling as she adjusted her blouse. The meeting with her father's lawyer had gone as expected, cold, clinical, and filled with legal jargon designed to protect her father's empire. But it had also been a turning point. Maya had learned something crucial. The lawsuit wasn't just about a store incident. It was part of a much bigger game, a game her father had been playing for years, and she had only just realized the cost of that game. Her reflection stared back at her, an image of a woman she didn't recognize. The soft chime of a text message interrupted her thoughts. She picked up her phone, her eyes scanning the brief message. "Meet me at the office. It's time to talk strategy." It was from her father. But what strategy? Maya felt a surge of anger rise within her. It wasn't just a strategy for saving face. It was a strategy for saving his empire, one that didn't care about her, her identity, or the truth. Maya's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed a response. "I'll be there, but we need to talk about more than just the press." The air inside Maya's office was thick with the weight of the decision she was about to make. The towering windows revealed a sprawling view of the city below, but all she could see was the reflection of herself in the glass. The woman who had spent her life building a perfect image, only to watch it shatter piece by piece. For the past few days, she'd been locked in a mental tug-of-war between what was expected of her and what she knew was right. Her father's relentless pursuit of control, his manipulation of the media and the lawsuit, had only intensified. And then there was Ava, whose cryptic words had haunted her since their meeting. "You can't keep pretending, Maya. Not anymore." But pretending had always been her armor. Pretending was how she kept her world from collapsing. But now, with everything at stake, her armor was failing. Maya glanced at the pile of papers on her desk: contracts, legal briefs, meetings scheduled with the best PR firms in the country. They were all part of the plan her father had set in motion. A plan that would keep the empire intact, no matter what. She stood and walked to the window, staring down at the bustling city. The lights were bright, but the streets below felt distant, like a world that was no longer hers to navigate. There was no escaping this moment. She had to make a choice. "I can't keep living for someone else," she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible against the hum of the city. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, pulling her back to reality. It was a message from Ava. "Meet me, now." Maya didn't hesitate. She knew that whatever Ava had to say would be crucial to what came next. The night was falling when Maya arrived at the dimly lit cafe where she and Ava had met before. The door opened with a soft creak as Maya stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. Ava was sitting at the same booth, her face unreadable, her hands tightly clasped around a cup of tea. Maya slid into the booth across from her. "What's going on, Ava?" Maya asked, her voice edged with frustration. Ava didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a long breath, her gaze distant. "There's something you need to know," Ava said, her tone grave. "Something that changes everything." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Ava leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been played, Maya, and not just by your father." Maya froze. The words landed like a punch to the gut. "What?" she whispered, her throat dry. Ava glanced around the cafe, ensuring no one was listening, before continuing. "There's more to this lawsuit than you think. It's not just a PR stunt. Someone powerful, has been orchestrating all of this from the shadows. And your father, he's caught in the middle." Maya's mind raced, her thoughts swirling like a storm. "You're saying my father isn't the mastermind behind this?" Ava shook her head. "No, he's been used. And now, you're being used too." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Who? Who's behind all of this?" Ava hesitated before speaking, her voice laced with urgency. "It's the CEO of Larkin Industries, James Larkin." The name hit Maya like a slap. Larkin Industries was one of the largest, most powerful companies in the world. Its reach extended far beyond the corporate world, its influence touching every corner of the political and economic spectrum. If Larkin was involved, this was no ordinary scandal. Larkin. Maya repeated, disbelief in her voice. "But why? What does he want with me? With my family?" Ava leaned back, her eyes clouded with a mixture of fear and anger. "Larkin is after something your father has. Something worth far more than your family's name or your company's profits. He's been manipulating you, Maya, using the lawsuit to destabilize your father's position and force him into a corner. And now that he's done that, you're his next target." The words seemed to echo in Maya's mind, the weight of them settling heavily in her chest. She'd known that there were powerful forces at work, but she had never imagined that Larkin would be involved. "What does he want from me?" Maya asked, her voice shaking. Ava's gaze softened. He wants control of your company. He wants to take everything your father has built, and he's using you as leverage to do it. Maya's heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The lawsuit, the media frenzy, her father's increasingly erratic behavior. It was all part of a larger scheme. A scheme designed to manipulate Maya, to push her into a corner where she had no choice but to follow Larkin's demands. You're telling me that I've been a pawn in a game I didn't even know existed? Maya's voice was barely above a whisper, the realization hitting her with brutal clarity. Ava nodded, her expression dark. Yes, and if you don't act fast, you'll lose everything. Your father, your company, your legacy. It's all on the line now. Maya's mind spun, her world unraveling faster than she could comprehend. But she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. What do I do? Maya asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Ava hesitated, then placed a hand on Maya's. You need to go to Larkin. You need to confront him before it's too late. Maya felt a surge of fear. Confront Larkin? The very thought of facing someone as powerful and dangerous as him made her blood run cold. I can't do that, she said, shaking her head. If I confront him, I'll be walking right into his trap. Ava's grip tightened. You can't keep running, Maya. Larkin's got you cornered, but you still have the power to fight back. If you want to save your father, your company, and your own soul, you have to take control. The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air between them. Maya knew that Ava was right. This was her only chance to break free from the tangled web that had ensnared her. But the fear gnawed at her, the uncertainty of what would happen next filling her with dread. I'll do it, Maya said, her voice firm, though her heart was pounding. But I need to know everything. I need to understand what Larkin is after, what he's really capable of. Ava gave a slow nod. I'll help you, but you need to move fast. He's already made his move. You've got no time to waste. The next few days felt like a blur. Maya threw herself into preparations, gathering every shred of information she could find about James Larkin and Larkin Industries. She met with her father's inner circle, speaking to those who had once been allies but had since become distant. She spoke with lawyers, financial experts, and PR consultants, all while trying to keep the true nature of the situation hidden from her father. But every conversation led back to the same cold, hard truth. Larkin was in control now, and Maya was the only one who could take him down. The night of the confrontation, Maya stood outside the glass and steel building that housed Larkin Industries, her heart pounding in her chest. The city lights below seemed to fade into the distance, leaving only the towering structure before her. It was cold, the air sharp against her skin, as if nature itself was warning her. She was walking into the lion's den. As she made her way to the elevator, her phone buzzed again. A message from Ava. Be careful. Larkin doesn't play by the rules. Watch your back. Maya stared at the words for a long moment, a sense of dread filling her. But she couldn't turn back now. She had made her choice. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead filled the air, casting long shadows across the sleek marble floors of the upscale store. For a moment, the world seemed suspended in time, a thin veil of tension hanging in the air. The air was thick with unspoken words, the silence punctuated only by the sound of delicate heels clicking against the floor as the white woman's footsteps reverberated in the spacious hallway. She stood, staring at the black girl with a look of disdain, an arrogant sneer curling at the corner of her lips. The store's atmosphere, once welcoming, now felt suffocating. It was as if the walls were closing in around them. Two women from entirely different worlds, caught in a moment of explosive confrontation. The black girl, her body tense with a mixture of fury and disbelief, stood her ground, refusing to bow to the weight of the other woman's privilege. Her eyes burned with the fire of injustice, an expression of quiet defiance on her face. Leave, the white woman spat, her voice dripping with entitlement. You don't belong here." The words cut through the tension like a knife, sending an involuntary shiver through the black girl's spine. For a fleeting second, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all, her heart racing, her palms sweating. But then, something snapped inside her. She wasn't just some girl to be dismissed. She wasn't someone who could be pushed around or made invisible. "No," she said, her voice firm, steady. "I'm not leaving." The confrontation, electric and charged, swirled around them like a storm ready to break. There was a sense of inevitability, as if the world itself had conspired to bring them here, to this very moment. A moment that would mark the start of something far greater than either of them could have predicted. The tension was palpable. A hushed gasp rippled through the onlookers who had gathered, drawn by the commotion, some with their phones already out, others frozen in place. But it was the sudden appearance of a familiar figure, a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit, that changed everything. The air shifted. The white woman's arrogant smile faltered as she looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. The black girl, momentarily distracted by the shift in energy, turned toward the new arrival. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw him, a man she hadn't expected to see today. Not here. Not now. Her father, the CEO. His presence in the store was like a strike of thunder in the midst of a violent storm. His broad shoulders seemed to fill the doorway, casting a shadow over the confrontation. His sharp suit, tailored to perfection, gleamed in the overhead lights, but it was his expression that commanded attention, stone-faced, unreadable. He surveyed the scene, his gaze briefly flicking over his daughter, then resting on the white woman, who now stood frozen in place, her previously self-assured posture faltering. The black girl's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for it. This was a new twist, a curveball thrown into a game that had already felt like it was spiraling out of control. "What's going on here?" Her father's voice was cold, authoritative, cutting through the stillness with ease. His tone was unmistakable, and the air seemed to crackle under the weight of his words. The white woman took a hesitant step back, her earlier bravado dissipating in an instant. She was refusing to leave, she stammered, her composure unraveling. "She doesn't belong here." The black girl's eyes flicked toward her father, searching his face for any sign of recognition or understanding. This was a man who had built his empire with hard work, intelligence, and influence. He was a force to be reckoned with, both feared and respected in business circles. But in that moment, in the face of this confrontation, she felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Would he back her up? Would he stand by her? The answer came quicker than she anticipated. Her father's gaze locked with the white woman's, and for a brief moment, the air was thick with tension. It was as if the whole world held its breath, waiting for his response. His lips curled into a smile, not one of warmth, but of control, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. "No," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of authority. "She's not going anywhere." His eyes, cold as steel, turned toward his daughter, the only sign of emotion flickering in their depths. He took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. "You were right to stand your ground." A surge of relief washed over the black girl, but it was mixed with a jolt of disbelief. Her father had chosen her. He had sided with her, standing firm against the woman who had tried to belittle her. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant, but the white woman wasn't finished yet. Her face, once flushed with anger, now contorted with something darker, disbelief, embarrassment, and fear. She straightened her back, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You can't just do that," she spat, her voice cracking. "This is my store. You can't treat me like this." "You can't treat my daughter like that," the CEO interrupted, his voice cutting her off like a whip. "Not in my presence. Not in front of anyone. And certainly not in my store." He turned to the crowd of onlookers who had been watching the spectacle unfold in stunned silence. "Anyone else have something to say?" The room fell into an eerie stillness. The white woman's face went pale, her eyes darting nervously from one person to the next. The collective weight of the situation seemed to press down on her, suffocating her. Her earlier confidence had been obliterated, replaced by a vulnerable fear she could no longer hide. "Get out of here," her father continued, his tone unwavering, filled with finality. "I don't care if you're the manager. You're done." A murmur ran through the crowd, the onlookers whispering among themselves. The white woman, now defeated, turned and hurried toward the back door, her high heels clattering against the floor, her head hung low in shame. For a long moment, the black girl and her father stood facing each other, the silence stretching between them. It was as if the world outside had frozen, the store itself holding its breath in the aftermath of the confrontation. The black girl's heart was racing, her chest tight, her breath shallow. Her father's gaze softened ever so slightly, his lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words that came out were not what she expected. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," he said quietly, the coldness of his usual demeanor gone. There was a hint of something else. Pride, perhaps, or admiration. The black girl swallowed hard, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And as she stood there, the full force of what had just happened sank in. This moment had the power to change everything. The weight of the night's events hung heavy in the air. Maya sat on the edge of the luxurious leather sofa, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. She stared out the large windows of her father's penthouse, the lights of the city twinkling below like distant stars, indifferent to the turmoil swirling within her. Her hand rested on the glass, cool against her skin, but it did little to ease the knot tightening in her chest. The confrontation in the store felt like it had happened in another lifetime. She had never imagined it would end the way it did. Her father, the CEO, arriving to defend her as if nothing had happened. As if her world hadn't just crumbled around her. The woman who had demanded she leave, her words still echoed in Maya's mind, sharp and accusing. Yet it wasn't the woman's hatred that had shaken her. It was the look in her father's eyes when he spoke, the calm mask he wore, as though he was already ready to sweep all under the rug. "Are you okay?" Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette a dark shadow against the light from the hallway. She didn't look up, didn't move. Her fingers curled into the soft fabric of her dress as if holding on to something, anything, to anchor herself in this surreal moment. "I'm fine," Maya said, her voice hollow. It wasn't true. She wasn't fine. She wasn't sure she ever would be again. Her father stepped into the room, his polished shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He paused in front of her, waiting, but Maya didn't meet his gaze. She couldn't. The words she wanted to say lodged in her throat, but they were tangled with the bitterness of betrayal, with the sting of silence that had grown between them over the years. "You know, Maya," he began, his tone even controlled. "What happened today? It was unfortunate. But you have to understand, people like her." He gestured vaguely, as though dismissing the woman as nothing more than an inconvenience. "They don't understand our world. They never will." Maya's chest tightened. She could feel the familiar anger bubbling up inside her, the same anger she'd felt every time he spoke like this, as if the world was his to control, as if the people who didn't play by his rules were nothing more than obstacles to be dealt with. "I don't think you understand, Dad," she said, her voice sharp now, cutting through the quiet. "It's not about her. It's about how you see it. It's how you look at everything, like it's a business deal." Her father's expression didn't change. He crossed his arms, a gesture of authority she'd known since she was a child. "What else would it be, Maya? We live in a world where power speaks. Money speaks. That's the way it's always been. And what about people?" Maya shot back, standing up now, her hands shaking with the surge of emotions. "What about the people who get hurt in this game? You think that doesn't matter?" Her father stepped closer, his presence looming over her, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. "You don't get it. You're not a little girl anymore, Maya. The world doesn't care about your feelings. And you do. She wasn't sure why she asked it. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Is that why you let them talk down to me today? Why you didn't step in? Because you don't care about what I'm feeling? There was a long pause, as if he were considering her words, but she saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a brief hesitation that betrayed his steely exterior. He sighed, lowering his gaze, almost as if he was disappointed in her. I did what I had to do, he said, his voice low. You don't understand the stakes. It's not as simple as right or wrong. It's about survival. Survival. Maya repeated, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. You think this is about survival? I'm not some business asset, Dad. I'm your daughter, but you're too wrapped up in your world to even see that. Her father's jaw tightened. That's enough, Maya. But Maya didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The dam had broken, and the flood of emotions rushed out in a torrent. You're always so busy controlling everything. Your company, your image, your life. But do you ever stop and look at the people you're pushing aside? Do you ever stop and think that maybe you're losing what actually matters? Her father was silent for a moment. Then, he shook his head as if she were the one who had lost touch with reality. You're young. You'll understand when you get older. But Maya didn't think she would. She didn't think she ever could. Not as long as he continued to live in this bubble, where everything was about power and wealth, where people were just pawns to be moved around. I don't think I will, she said quietly, her voice trembling but resolute. Not if I have to live like this. She turned away from him, walking towards a large windows again, staring out at the city below. Her heart was pounding, but this time it was a different feeling. It wasn't fear or confusion. It was clarity. For the first time, she realized just how far apart they had grown. She had been trying to find her place in his world, but it wasn't her world. She was never going to fit in the way he wanted her to, and she couldn't keep pretending she was okay with it. Her father didn't move. For a long time, there was nothing but the soft sound of the wind outside, the occasional hum of a passing car. Then he spoke again, but this time, his voice was quieter, almost regretful. I never meant for things to turn out this way, Maya. I wanted to protect you. Maya didn't turn around. The words felt hollow, like they had been said 1,000 times before, but never truly heard. I don't need protection, Dad, she said, her voice firm now. I need you to see me. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care if he did or not. The silence between them stretched out, long and heavy. But this time, Maya didn't feel the need to fill it. She had said what she needed to say, and now, the rest was up to her. The city lights continued to twinkle in the distance, indifferent to the storm that had just passed through the penthouse. Maya made her decision. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for certain. She would no longer live in his shadow. As she walked out of the room, leaving her father standing there, she could hear his voice faintly behind her, calling her name. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The world was calling to her now, and she was ready to answer. And somewhere, in the distance, a new chapter of her life was beginning.